You're rolling.
We're on Romans 12 tonight. We are on the home stretch of Romans. Everything Paul has taught up to this point is now going to find application in the last few chapters. Okay, so there's this big switch in Romans, from Romans 11 to Romans 12. This is your evening entertainment. Show started now.
Hey, let's eat something. I'll feed him some.
There's a switch that happens from Romans 11 to Romans 12, from theology to more practical teaching. And so we've made this transition, and that's where we're going tonight, is from Romans 12, verses 1 through 8. And so just a little introductory stuff there in your notes. In the final 5 chapters of Romans, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, Paul's going to teach us how to live out the glorious truths of chapters 1 through 11. Okay? So he's getting a lot of heavy theology in that first portion, 1 to 11. And now in chapter 12, he's going to start with practice. Okay? And so there's a point to all of this. Paul does this a lot in his letters. He starts with theology and tells you why, and then he leads to the what. Another way we say this in theology is that the indicative always precedes the imperative. Now, if that doesn't make sense to you, what is an imperative?
Command.
It's a command. You don't give commands first. You start with the indicative. You give a statement of truth, and out of that truth comes the command. All right? You get in trouble when you start doing reverse the order. If you just start off saying, you need to don't have sex and don't do drugs, and y'all need to, some other stuff you hear people always,
Listen to loud music.
don't listen to rock music, yeah, or whatever. Don't wear skimpy clothes, and don't dress like a hooligan, and don't act crazy, and don't cuss either. If you start off like that, what does that make you do? When I started saying those things, how did you feel? You're like, whoa, dude, like, chill out. Okay? But the reason is I started with the imperative. But let me start with the indicative, and you'll see a difference. You guys, God has been gracious to us in giving His Son to die for our sins. He's been raised from the dead, and our bodies are not our own bodies anymore. And so if we were bought with a price, and Jesus has bought our bodies, then we need to glorify God with our bodies. And so we need to avoid things that would damage the temple that God's given us. So we need to avoid what comes out of our mouths in cursing. We need to avoid what we do with our bodies in sexual immorality. We need to avoid getting drunk because we need to be filled with the Spirit. You see the difference? Like, you can receive that better because I started with indicative. Here's the truth, and now here's the application. That makes sense? That's why Paul does that. Every letter he writes starts with this theology and then moves more to the practical. And so, because God has graciously given us so much, we must live, therefore, in grateful obedience. We should live in obedience. Now, what I just told you about the indicative coming before the imperative, this is kind of the same thing here. Orthodoxy, which is right living. When people say an orthodox person is someone who teaches what's right, their teaching isn't heresy. Orthodoxy should always lead to, I'm going to teach you another big word, orthopraxy. O-R-T-H-O-P-R-A-X-Y. Those are 2 Greek words that means right living. Right teaching should lead to right living. If you know the truth, that truth should affect the way you live, right? And so, Christian, this is next in your notes, Christian doctrine or Christian teaching, Christian doctrine can never be separated from our Christian duty. Let me say that another way. What we believe will determine how we behave. What we believe will determine how we behave. I'll say that another way. We must translate from Romans 1 through 11 what we have learned. We need to translate what we have learned to how we should live. Okay? The biggest danger for us in this Bible study group is to learn a lot of stuff about Romans and then not be changed by it. The biggest danger is to accumulate a lot of knowledge in your head and be puffed up and it not transform your life. Okay? So we need to know the truth in our minds, but it needs to affect the way that we live. Okay? So let's look at Romans 12 verses 1 and 2, because these are two verses that are crucial to the book of Romans, crucial for the Christian life. And we're going to spend the rest of this first page looking at these two verses. Okay? So, you've probably heard it. A lot of you can even memorize it and quote it. Romans 12 verses 1 and 2. Would someone mind reading that for us?
I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect.
Okay. Y'all heard those verses before? Probably at just about every D Now, every youth conference, everything you go to, a lot of people always bring up these verses. Because they're so important, and we don't need to let familiarity with the verses cause us to get hard to what they're actually teaching. And so Paul, in these two verses, summarizes how we should properly respond to God's grace. God's been gracious to us. Remember, in the beginning of Romans, and even while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. Romans 9 taught about how God was merciful in choosing to save us through election. Romans 10, He gives this glorious purpose where He sends us out to make the gospel known to others. He has done so much for us. So how do we respond to the grace of God? Verse 1 explains our relationship to God. Verse 1 explains our relationship to God. And what is our relationship to God? Verse 1, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. First verse is about your relationship to God. The second verse explains our relationship to the world. It explains our relationship to the world. So verse 1, your relationship to God. Verse 2, your relationship to the world. And what should your relationship with the world be? Verse 2 says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So that's how Paul sets this up. And so that's where we're going. We're talking about our relationship to God and our relationship to the world. All right, so here we go. Verse 1. One more time, let's read it. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Okay? Now, notice that he says, I appeal to you by the mercies of God. Because, this is in your notes now, because of God's mercy, because God's been so merciful to us, Paul urges us to present our bodies as living sacrifices unto God. All right, so when he says to present your bodies, What does that mean? That does not mean run around naked, right? Not just, here's my body, I present my body to you. That's not what he means. What does he mean to present your body? To present refers to a once and for all definite presentation of your whole self in service to God. You present yourself. You don't just show up, you present yourself and give yourself away. The background here is from the Old Testament. The Old Testament sacrifices of thanksgiving. That's the next blank. The background of here is presenting your bodies is coming from Old Testament sacrifices of thanksgiving. You read the book of Leviticus, and I don't think I included this verse, Chris, but you read the book of Leviticus, and when people offer their sacrifices to God, they do it out of thanksgiving, and they present them to God, and they say, God, what I lay on this altar is all yours. It's yours. It is a sacrifice of complete surrender. It is a sacrifice of complete surrender of our life, our possessions, and our gifts. So this is heavy stuff. This isn't just like youth group language. This is God asking you to present your life in complete and total surrender to Him as a sacrifice. Because your life is not your own, right? We have been bought with a price and we belong to God. Let's read 1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20. I mentioned this verse a few minutes ago. Someone read that for us.
Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you are bought with a price. So glorify God in your body.
Your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, and you have your body from God. God gave you the body that you have, and then He bought your body at a price at the death of His own Son. And so your body is not your own. So what you do with your body matters. When a person says, I'm going to go do this or I'm going to go do this because it doesn't matter, it's my body and I can do what I want to with it, the Christian cannot say that because your body is not your own. So what you do with your body really does matter. It matters what you do to this body that God's given you because it's not yours. You are a steward of something God gave you. Think of a marriage vow. It's the next blank in your notes. Think of a marriage vow. When I got married to Jenny, and we walked down that aisle, or she walked down the aisle to me, we presented ourselves to one another. This was a one-time commitment with continual, ongoing implications. I didn't just present myself to Jenny on our wedding day and say, Jenny, here I am, and I'll be here for at least a couple of years, and then after that, we'll see where we are, and then I'll decide whether I want to be committed to you after that. Now, if I had said that on our wedding day, there's big problems, right? Or what if Jenny had come up to me and said, hey, here I am, I present myself to you, everything I have is yours, everything I am is yours, unless I change my mind. And then I may take it back. That's not a vow. That's not a commitment. And when you present yourself to God, you're saying, God, here I am. I've got a blank check with my life. Anything you want to do with my life is yours. It's all yours. It's a one-time commitment with ongoing implications. Now, there may be times to renew your dedication to your spouse. You get married, there may be a day when you renew. I'm not a big fan of renewing your vows. I think it's silly, because if you make a vow once, you shouldn't have to renew it again. What I mean is, I'm constantly renewing and constantly repenting and constantly going back to the vows I made to Jenny on December the 31st of 2011. I still look back at those vows, and in my own mind, I'm renewing them, and I'm thinking on them, and I'm committing to those over and over and over again. When I find myself straying, I go back to that day. So there are times when you might renew your commitment, but there is never a need to repeat it. There's never a need to repeat your marriage vows. I'm never again going to say, I take thee, Jenny, as my lawfully wedded wife. I just used to think it was awfully wedded wife. I never understood why they said that in a wedding ceremony. Do you take Jenny to be your awfully wedded wife? But it's lawful. I'm never going to say that again because I've said it once and I meant it the first time. It was a vow and a commitment, right? So there's never a need to repeat it. But when you present your bodies, the dedication of our bodies is a foundational commitment to the Lord. It's a commitment. Let me stop here for a second and ask you a question. If this verse is true, that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, and that you are not your own, for you were bought with a price, and you're supposed to glorify God in your body, what implications do you think that has for the way you live your life? Practical implications. What flows out of this? What does that look like?
It should affect, how you live, like every single aspect of it.
Okay, like what?
What we say.
Okay, so my mouth is not my own, right? It's good. So I don't just get to say what I want to say because it's not my mouth.
What we watch.
Okay, what I do with my eyes, it's not going to affect me. It's my body. I can do what I want to. And what I watch on Netflix does not affect me. Yes, it does. And your body's not your own.
What we listen to.
Okay, yeah, we're getting, see the pattern here? Ears, right? So what I listen to affects my body, affects my mind, right? What I do sexually, that's my body. And I don't get to, it's not my body that I can do what I want to with it. I'm supposed to glorify God in my body. Anything else?
What we put on our body.
Tattoos? Ouch. Now that's a touchy one, right? And listen, don't hear this. Don't hear, John said you can't get a tattoo. I didn't say that. I'm saying your body's not your own. And if you decide to make a decision like that, you first need to ask the question, why do I want to get a tattoo? Second of all, after why is, will this tattoo glorify God in my body? Right? So if I got some little butterfly on my backside, right, which I'm never showing anymore. We got some weird vision now. And I just got to get this butterfly tattoo. Then I need to ask myself, because it's my body. I can self-express myself however I want to. Right? That's the age we live in. That's not a commandment from the Lord, right? Thou shalt not get a tattoo. There's some godly people. Huh?
The 11th.
Right, it's in there somewhere, right? It's not a thou shalt not get a tattoo. The question is your body, what are you doing with your body? Okay? Don't hear legalism there, okay? Because I'm not anti-tattoo. Don't hear that. Okay? I'm not pro-tattoo either, by the way. I'm pro God being glorified in your body. Okay? And you need to be discerning. You need to be wise with that. Okay? Anything else? What other implications does that have for your body?
Our actions, how we go about doing certain things.
Okay.
What we put in our body.
What you put in your body? There you go. Yeah, that's important. That's convicting because that's not just like drugs and alcohol. I probably shouldn't eat 4 brownies, you know? I need to treat my body well. You getting convicted, Cynthia?
Devil gets you, man. Like, this is a good food.
John has a handful of cheese puffs. He's kind of being
Are you
convicted.
being buttons?
Like, should I have this? Already. It's like, don't go to Krispy Kreme, y'all.
Yeah.
I don't want to I don't know.
this probably will sound judgmental. I don't know, but I feel like a lot of times, like pastors, like they'll preach stuff like this, but like a lot of pastors, I don't know, I feel like are really overweight and they just like forget this whole thing that they need to take care of their bodies.
It's hypocritical.
Yeah.
But truthfully, everybody's a hypocrite in the pulpit too.
We are. Like there's.
But you're right. That does stand out when you're.
But you're right. I think if I'm a pastor, I stand up and preach in front of people. I need to take care of myself. That might mean that I need to lay off things. I need to exercise. I need to take care of my body because my physical body is actually a portrayal of my inner self. Now, I'm not saying that you get your self-esteem from what you look like, okay? You don't look in the mirror and say, I'm going to make myself feel better and I just wish I was prettier or better looking. That's not where you get your self-esteem. But your body is a reflection of the way you live and the way you treat yourself, okay? So, this is what I said here in the notes. The body, you can eat your cheese puffs. It's okay. The body is the outward form and expression of the inner person, okay? And so that includes your talents, your abilities, your desires, your aspirations. It's not just not sinning with your body, it's what are you doing with your body to glorify God? It's not just I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't go to parties, I don't sleep around. It's what are you doing with your body to glorify God? How can you use your body in a way that glorifies God?
Very insightful.
What are some things you can do with your body to glorify God? Let's stop thinking the negative side about what you can't do and think about what you can do with your body to glorify God.
Pray.
Pray.
Study the Bible.
Study. Use your eyes, your mind, your brain.
Purity.
Purity, yeah.
Worship.
Worship, yeah.
Fellowship.
Yeah, be in fellowship with one another. Yeah, there's a lot more.
Help somebody.
Yeah, help somebody out, right?
Use your hands.
Use your hands, go change a car tire unless you don't have a jack big enough, and then you get the other jack to call AAA, right?
Work.
Work, change diapers, right? You raise your children. You serve your parents, or your spouse, or your roommate. Sing, right? We glorify our body, God with our lips. There's all these different things. And so your body, when you present your body, you're saying, Lord, I'm giving you my eyes. I'm giving you what I look at. I'm giving you what I think about. I'm giving you what I listen to. I'm giving you what I say. I'm giving you my feet and where I go. I'm giving you my hands and how I serve. I'm giving you every aspect of myself. I present my body as a living sacrifice. Okay? And so, if that's true, if dedicating your body is a commitment to the Lord, then we dare not take this dedication lightly. We dare not take it lightly. Okay? Now, how do we present our bodies to the Lord? As a what? As a living sacrifice. Now that is an oxymoron. Right? Like jumbo shrimp. Doesn't make sense. What's another one? You ever heard somebody say, well, I shouldn't say that, but pretty ugly?
Yeah. I didn't want to say that.
That doesn't make sense, but all right, that's another one.
Sophomore.
Sophomore.
It means wise.
Wise fool.
Yeah.
I don't think I knew that. I do now. I guess Sophia's wisdom. More. I didn't know the word for it. Hey, there's one other one that I always think of. Well, one of them is a living sacrifice, right? A sacrifice, what do you have to do to be a sacrifice? Die, right? And yet, Paul says present your bodies as living sacrifices. So, living sacrifice refers to our standing before the Lord. As a sacrifice, that means we are dead But we're not physically dead. We are dead to the ways of the world. When you present yourself as a living sacrifice, you say, I'm a sacrifice. I'm dead to the world. But as a living sacrifice, we are alive to the way of Christ. We are alive to the way of Christ. Now the good news is that as a living sacrifice, we are not required to be killed, since Christ has already died for us. You don't have to die. Jesus died in your place. And yet, instead, we are called to live. We're living sacrifices since God's Spirit now dwells within us. We're living sacrifices. Let's look at verse 1 again. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. And how do we present them? Holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship or your reasonable service. Reasonable service is the spiritual worship which logically flows from God's mercy. If God has been merciful to you, then it logically follows that you should give your service to God. Presenting yourselves to God as holy and acceptable is the right thing to do because He's died in your place. He has sacrificed Himself so that you might live. And if you live, then you live unto Him. God's been gracious to us. He deserves our highest form of service. And so true worship, when we talk about worship of God, you usually think about singing. But true worship of God involves the body and the mind. And worship is a matter of the heart. It's a matter of the heart. One of the hardest things to do in a worship service is to actually focus on God. Have you noticed that? You ever caught yourself in the middle of a song and realize you're not really paying attention at all to what you're singing? Gosh, we did it all the time in church. I remember singing songs like, I surrender all. Remember that? You ever sing that in church? I surrender all. And I'm thinking, we're all singing it like we're at a funeral. and you start looking around and you're like, man, do we really mean this? You ever just ask that question in the middle of a worship service? Do we really mean what we're singing? There's some other songs like that I remember singing in church thinking, you remember the one, that holiness is what I long for? You ever heard this song? Holiness is what I long for. You ever heard that?
Yeah.
There's this line in there that says brokenness is what I long for. And you're seeing this, I'm like, brokenness is what I long for. Brokenness is what I need. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be broken. Do I really want God to really convict me and break me over my sin? I'm not sure I want that or not. Any other songs you feel like you sing that sometimes it's hard to really mean what you're singing? Any specific songs come to mind?
The Heart of Worship. I'm coming back to the
Oh yeah, there's some songs we've just been singing forever since the 90s, and I'm so over it that
We all were like 10 when we were singing these songs, I guess, so.
Oh, here's one. You give and take away. You give and take away. What? Now I get it. Like we can sing that, but that's hard, right? We love the you give, but it's that take away part nobody likes. That's when it's hard, you know? So worship is the body and the mind. You can be in a worship service and with your body expressing yourself visibly as if you're worshiping and be so far away from worship, you're not even in the same building. Like you can be jumping around and hands raised, eyes closed, shouting